Our perception of money is changing rapidly, and banks are at the center of all of it. From how we access it, to how we buy, to how we trust that that money will be there when we need it. I'm Kiah Haslett, the creator of Fintech Takes Banking. Here on Bank Nerd Corner, I talk with bankers, economists, academics, and more about the complex dynamics shaping the financial services landscape. On this very special episode of Bank Nerd Corner, I'm joined by my friends Alex Johnson of Fintech Takes and Jason Mikula of Fintech Business Weekly to discuss an iconic list of movers, shakers, and criminals. That's right, we're talking about some of the most infamous names on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. The guys joined me to talk about their relationship to white-collar crime before doing a little show and tell about 4 people who are on this even more exclusive Forbes list. We then talk about incentives, victims, and the continuum of criminality. It's a big topic and winds up being a long episode, but I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Hey, Alex. Hey, Jason. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be fun.
Caffeinated.
Well, I took a conversation that we have in the most influential group chat in fintech and decided to mainline it because I think there's it's pretty interesting, and I think there's some room for debate. And that is, what is going on with the Forbes 30 Under 30? And there's, I think, a long-running joke that this list, that Forbes, puts itself through to create this pretty exhaustive, many people on this list. They're all under the age of 30. There's like an illustrative or infamous turn where some of them are then arrested for whatever reason was they were listed on the list. And I wanted to talk about some of those people today and bring you guys in. So my first question for you guys is, what is your awareness or thoughts of the Forbes 30 Under 30? Alex?
That's a great question. So I will admit to having, I guess, not been involved enough in the tech startup ecosystem in my 20s to care about it personally, right? So I feel like
it was never something you were going to get.
Right. So I feel like if you thought for a second you had a chance of being on this list, your relationship is very different to it. I discovered it in my 30s. And so it has always been for me a sort of exercise in kind of observing other people's vanity, I guess, is how I would think about it. Because it does sort of self-select for a type of person, which we're going to talk about. And so I've always kind of, whenever it gets announced and people are like, hey, congratulations, I made 30 under 30, whatever, it's always felt very oh, so you've self-selected yourself into that group, and that tells me something about you. I only became aware of the sort of dark side of the 30 under 30 list when I can't remember which person. I know we're going to talk about a bunch of them.
Yeah, but there is a person that made you aware of it.
There is. There's a specific person where I was like, oh, this is a pretty predictive list, actually. And so that awareness came even later. So I would say I sort of have come to the list later and from sort of an outside view.
Jason, did you ever think you were going to get on the Forbes 30 Under 30?
No, I did not. That is not something I aspired to. And I think my awareness is probably, I would guess, roughly similar to Alex's or to both of yours, in the sense that I'm immediately skeptical of any of these sort of listicle awards things, because particularly now wearing, I guess, a publisher or a writer hat, it just feels like fairly naked engagement bait. Of course, if I make this list of people, those people are then going to go out and promote the fact that they're on this list, driving clicks, driving eyeballs, driving ad dollars. So I have a certain amount of built-in skepticism for any of these kinds of awards or listicle things. I'm sure you guys have also gotten the untargeted spam emails offering you for a low fee the ability to be on some kind of award program or award list. So already a certain amount of built-in skepticism. And then I think when it comes to the Forbes stuff specifically, my greatest exposure is probably the running joke. This literal running joke of the Forbes cover of Elizabeth Holmes, although asterisk, she was not actually on
she wasn't
the 30 under 30
Forbes
list.
30 under 30, yeah.
and then showing like the next picture of the person in like the orange jumpsuit or what have you. So yeah, I think coming at it from a pretty similar perspective is probably both of you.
Well, I would expect that to be the responses of two people who are never on the Forbes 30 under 30. I have distinct memories of making fun of the list. Actually, when I was under 30, it would come out, and I remember people like, especially there's a media list within the Forbes 30 under 30, and so when you're in media and you're reading about who is like kind of the vanguards of your industry, and being like, one, like, I've never heard of this person, and then two, being like, I think they're like a little too accomplished. Like, I, as a 25 or 26 or 27-year-old, I think I'm just fine. I think I live like a nice life. I live a normal life. I have normal hobbies. I have a normal relationship to work. And then two would read like what people who are ostensibly my age were doing. It was just like, I was like, you almost are like, how do you even do something like this when you're that young? And like, I didn't even think you were allowed to do these things when you're in your 20s. So
you can just do things. That's the motto.
I've heard that before.
Yeah.
But, and like, she's not on the list of people that I put together for this show, but Olivia Nuzzi was on the list when she was Forbes 30 under 30. So I feel like, you know what?
That makes sense.
I'm fine. I'm good. I have like a nice life and I don't need to be on this list. So, okay. So the other part of this question is, yes, there is this this notoriety, this notorious dark side. What is your guys' general interest in crime or true crime, and then white-collar crime specifically? Jason, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably safe to say, based on my body of work over the past couple of years, that
you love it.
I've developed a strong interest in crime, and specifically white-collar crime. I mean, I guess I find it fascinating in a couple of different ways, but particularly, at least from some of the stories that I've covered, this chasm between what people might say, you know, on stage or in an interview with a reporter, or I guess maybe in a pitch deck to a VC potential funder, and then like the reality on the ground of like, what is this company actually doing? How many users do they have? How much revenue do they have? How quickly are they growing? And this probably speaks more to my own either upbringing or naivete to think that like, you should be able to succeed in business while still being honest and telling the truth about the business that you're building. And I don't know if that was ever true, but it certainly feels like in our Year of the Lord 2026, and many of the cases or many of the people we're going to talk about, which go back to 2020 or earlier, that there are incentives that encourage people not to tell the truth. Now, where does that veer? And I know we're also going to discuss this, and I think there's probably going to be differences of opinion. Where does it veer from the kind of fake it till you make it, Silicon Valley hustle culture ethos? And when does that actually become illegal or become white collar crime? And I'm not sure I've actually fully formed my own opinion there. So we'll see how much Kiah and Alex can influence my thinking about what counts as crime versus just sort of like bad behavior.
Well, Jason, I'm so thrilled to hear that you're open to being persuaded to, I think probably the crazier opinion that will be shared in the group today, which is mine. But I think this is going to be a very fruitful conversation. Alex, what is your relationship to crime, true crime, and white collar crime?
These are good questions. I don't have much of a history with true crime. So Kiah, you're going to have to be our true crime person on this podcast, which I know you'll fill in that role admirably. My relationship to white collar crime, I think, is similar to what Jason was describing, where it's not the world I come from, but as I have done this job for long enough, the thing that has struck me over and over again is this sort of like incremental path that people follow to go from like, yeah, this isn't quite true, but I feel like if I just say this, I can sort of manifest this future that I'm going towards anyway, and like who's getting hurt, to like Elizabeth Holmes ending up in jail. And like, I had never really studied that progression.
Yeah.
I just sort of
path.
assumed like, I kind of assumed like good person, bad person, honest person, liar. And studying and covering the sort of fintech tech startup ecosystem as closely as I have for the last, 5+ years, I begin to understand and maybe empathize a tiny bit with founders who end up in jail, who start the first step on that path, which is like, oh yeah, your incentive is just don't tell the truth at this moment.
Yeah.
And like, what does that teach you? And then like, how do you become a worse person progressively over time? And so I kind of feel a little bit like, old grumpy man yells at cloud now that I've like observed that path long enough. But, the path between sort of aggressive startup founder to ending up in jail for committing really bad white collar crimes, like that now makes sense to me as a continuum or a progression in a way it didn't before I started doing this job.
Yeah. I love that journey for you both, by the way.
Well, it also, particularly like the Silicon Valley founder arc, to a certain extent, it makes sense to me because in order to believe that you can walk into a room and raise millions, or these days, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, like you have to be kind of insane and or a narcissist and have a very, very high opinion of yourself to create that reality distortion field of like, hi, yes, I'm, in the case of the people we're talking about, 25 years old, 27 years old, and you should invest $200 million in my startup to
be clear,
democratize prediction
and the other thing I'll add to that,
markets
and we're not doing Sam Bankman-Fried, right? None of us picked him as our person to talk about.
I did.
Jason, you're adjacent, so SBF will come up a little bit. The one thing I'm doing an adjacent as an example of what you're talking about, Jason, is I'll never forget reading the profile that I think it was Sequoia maybe published about SBF. Yeah, and it was like 40,000 words or some insane like
it was a cringeworthy Sequoia profile
about SBF that then they scrubbed from their website after everything
went bad.
But part of the write-up was they were describing the first like meeting they ever had where he was like pitching them. And he was, I guess, like playing video games at the same time that he was pitching them and wasn't really paying attention. And they loved that. They thought that was amazing. They thought that was like the greatest thing ever. And so it was a very interesting window into the way, I think, to Jason's point, Silicon Valley and sort of the venture capital ecosystem has evolved, where it sort of really goes out of its way to look for sort of like really strange, like kind of people with brains that work very differently. And I think that overlapping with Forbes 30 under 30, like I think you can't extricate that culture of like, we want to look for antisocial weirdos who give us very strange signals because those are the people who will build the next billion-dollar company. Like those two things go together to me. And I think SBF is
Yeah, I would say you're kind of touching on this theme that we'll probably talk about, which is the incentives that allow for or positively select for maybe someone who, if they think that this is an appropriate way to interact with someone to give them money, they might have a different opinion about what is appropriate business conduct or what constitutes, right? Like, how they should behave at certain points or, for my relationship with white collar crime is like maybe some of the accounting or the reconciliation or being truthful or things like that. So you guys alluded to this. I have a different relationship with crime and true crime. I am part of that. Do you remember when Serial first came out and like all these people started like talking about the case? That kind of also kickstarted my relationship with podcasting, but very specifically the genre of true crime podcasts. And so I've listened to a lot of true crime podcasts. I don't really watch true crime TV. I read even fewer true crime books, but there's this whole, genre of content around this. And now I run a true crime meetup in Nashville, and I ran a true crime meetup when I was in Charlottesville. So I do actually some like community building and events and facilitation and moderation around different, the discussion of crime and the discussion of crime in society and who is a victim and who is a perpetrator. One of the things I'm most proud of is, how we talk about crime and rights or crime and law, the legal aspects of that. I've done a true crime meetup called, Before It Was a Right, It Was a Crime, right? The social definitions of crime, rather than just purely like morals and things like that. I think like it's really interesting now to argue like, well, this is a crime, but if someone's doing it and they're in power and they're going to get away with it, like, we've seen a bunch of documents that have come and detailed things that seem very criminal, very upsetting. And as far as I can tell, no punishment, so must not be a crime, right? Like there's almost this like kind of logical fallacy you can get into where like the lived experience is like things are crimes if you get in trouble for them and things are not crimes if you don't get in trouble for them sometimes. Hot take. But my relationship to white collar crime and specifically like where I think my job intersects with it is in J school and college, I had to read like, you were supposed to read a book that was like relevant to what you wanted to do as a reporter or something. And for whatever reason, I picked this book called 24 Days, which is 24 Days, How Two Wall Street Journal Reporters Uncovered the Lies That Destroyed Faith in Corporate America. It's a book about the Enron scandal. I don't know if this is like the truest version of it or if it's the version that the Wall Street Journal is very interested in is talking about. But it was how these two reporters, they received like some tips about accounting irregularities in Enron. And it was interesting because someone like the person who was tipping them off had to kind of explain why the balance sheet and the income statement didn't work. And like these reporters get these tips and they actually have to use and learn about like the balance sheet and how Enron was reporting certain things. And I don't want to say like I could have read Enron statements because Enron is an energy company. I'm a bank reporter, but it really it was like a financial journalist's like Watergate. Like, you know what I mean? The idea that you could, or like Spotlight, right? Like that you could look at the financial reporting and you could see what they were trying to hide. You could, so like to me, that gave me the like, follow the money. And like, I've actually told someone my friend is learning, she's taking this like certification for her insurance designation. And she has to learn like how to read a financial statement of like a business who's looking for like P&C insurance. And I was literally like, would it help you if you imagined that they were trying to like hide like a crime from you or hide fraud basically. And if like that would change your relationship to like learning how to read this thing is that you could uncover a fraud and then save your company the money of not underwriting the insurance. And so that's where my interest in like white collar and like, I think it like probably started my interest in accounting, right? Was like, oh man, this is how we're going to find the stuff. And like that kind of only works really and we'll talk about this, but like kind of in the like regulated public company space or like in my space with call reports and that type of like regulated, mandated reporting and standardized reporting versus like what I feel like we see it's
tough in startup land because like they don't do any of these things. I mean, that's one of the things I struggle with a lot of this, and it's why I've become like a darker, more depressed human over the time that I've written this newsletter.
True crime is for you, Alex.
Yeah, really, I know. I think it's because like in startup VC land, you just make up numbers and you just say things, right? And so it is really hard to be sort of, I don't want to say objective, but like it's hard to take everything at face value, right? Because it's like there's just so much stuff coming at you that just doesn't make any sense. And yet the people saying it, and Jason, I know you've had this experience too. Like I talked to some of these folks, not people who've quite made this level of like Hall of Shame, Forbes 30 under 30, but like I've talked to folks who would fit on the adjacent lists that you might make for this type of founder Hall of Shame. And they will like lie to you without any physiological tell.
What is
all,
a
right?
lie,
I mean, like,
Alex? Come on.
A thing you know isn't true.
But I think so. A couple of additional thoughts that I think will be relevant for this conversation. I mean, one, Alex, what you're describing just reminds me that so much of what you see, particularly in the earliest stage startups, but you could say this is equally true of Tesla today or SpaceX today, is about driving a narrative as opposed to what those numbers in the balance sheet or what the numbers in the P&L are. And so much of crafting that narrative is around saying, oh, no, you don't understand. Like, you can't compare my company to General Motors, or you can't compare my company to Fifth Third Bank. We're different because of XYZ reasons. And so you need to focus on these numbers and these metrics over here because we're a different kind of business that you can't really understand or compare in a traditional way, because that just means you don't get it, right? So, I mean, I think that's one sort of recurring theme we see across startups in general, and particularly the ones that end up getting themselves into trouble. I think a second, if I think back to sort of the early days of Silicon Valley before any of us were in this space, a lot of the companies that were being founded, if you think of like a Google or a Facebook or whatever, were in functionally...
No, they aren't. Like, many spaces aren't regulated or then like Theranos is like FDA. You know what I mean? Like, there's like the software companies, right?
Yeah. Well, but even there, and I mean, Theranos is also just a wild story. But I mean, the example in this space that I always use to illustrate the point I'm going to make is Uber, where it's like, well, the business we want to build is illegal, so we could try doing it the right way and getting individual licenses for each of these drivers in each city that we want to operate in. But that's hard and expensive and slow. And there's incumbent stakeholders, aka taxi drivers or, TLC, taxi limousine commissions, that we would have to deal with. And that doesn't scale. So what if we just do an illegal business and we grow it big enough, quickly enough? And to be fair, it solves a real problem. I don't know if either of you ever tried to get a taxi in a city like Chicago if you didn't live in like a high taxi area, and you would call Flash Cab and just pray that eventually a taxi might show up at your house. And generally they would not. And if they did, they claim their credit card reader was broken. Right. So it's not to say that like, in that example, didn't identify a real problem, have a real solution. But instead of sort of doing, quote unquote, the right thing and working through the existing regulatory infrastructure, just said, let's build a really big but illegal business. And then after it gets big enough, we'll apply political pressure to legitimize the business model that we've already created. And you do see that time and time again. Prediction markets right now being a good example. Crypto, I would argue, being an example of that as well.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I think, to put a fine point on what you're saying, Mikula, like, disruption sort of excuses all other things, right? Like, I think that's kind of the inherent idea
in your guys'
here
world,
that,
yes.
Well, no, and it is, right? Because it's like the basic idea is, look, disruption is not nice. Incumbents don't like it. Government that exists to sort of protect incumbents doesn't like it. Yep. But it is our moral duty as technology founders, as startup founders, as venture capital investors investing in technology startups, to push disruption forward. And what that means is we're going to do things that are unpopular. We're going to do things that are technically illegal, but we are doing it for the benefit of humankind, and they will thank us later. And by the way, we'll make a ton of money also. And so we shouldn't let any of these little details kind of stop us or get in our way or really even bother us. And, Jason, I think you're making the exact right point. Like, that sort of worshiping at the altar of disruption and everything sitting downstream of that, I think, speaks to a lot of the characters on this list that we're going to talk about.
Okay, so I gave you guys a little bit of homework, and we're going to move on to the show and tell portion of the podcast. So I tried to create what I thought was a comprehensive list of rather well-known people on the Forbes 30 under 30 who have subsequently been arrested or charged for something. And that was a really important part, is that you have to be arrested and charged, rather than you can't just be like a bad person who did things that people don't think is pro-social. And then each one of us was supposed to research one person on that list, and we'll give a 7-minute presentation about talking about potentially the year that the person was on the list, who this person is, their age, their company, what the company was supposed to do, the actions that got them in trouble, who they got in trouble with, and the amount of trouble they got into. And then if there's any case updates, and then any fun facts you have about this person, and how bad you think this is in the scheme of white collar crime. I'm giving everyone 7 minutes because we could be here all day, and I want these people to be more illustrative than talk about any one specific person. I did 2 people so that we will have 4 names.
Cheating.
Well, no, I just wanted to have 4 names. Like, I thought 4 would be better than 3.
Fair. Okay.
I'll go first. So, okay. And then I'm going to time myself. I'm going to time everyone, but I will time myself. My first person is Joanna Smith Griffin. I actually picked 2 women because I believe both in women's rights and women's wrongs.
Feminism, yeah.
Joanna is 30 when she makes the Forbes list in 2021. Now, I don't know if you remember 2021. I get my first COVID vaccine in 2021, or I get the first round of vaccines, so I am vaccinated. The summer is like the murder of George Floyd. There's a bunch of racial justice protests across the country. Nomadland wins Best Picture. I was like, I didn't see it. We were still kind of in the haze of COVID. Joanna Smith Griffin is an undergraduate and then a graduate student at Harvard Extension School. She graduates class of 2016. She was a former teacher whose students were often absent. And so she comes up with this company called All Here at a startup incubator, which is an education service that would send text messages to parents to check in with their children and make sure they attend school and try to cut down on truancy. Prior to COVID, they have this what's an intervention management platform. It was kind of research based. It was trying to be small nudges. It was kind of that nudge movement. These interventions that would be low stakes, low cost, scalable, and they would help. They would be better than anything down the line if you could kind of address patterns before they got really bad. They also when COVID happens, they have to switch to virtual, which is so much harder, I guess, than in-person engagement and truancy. And so they have to do how to engage with students virtually. And teachers were having a really hard time with this. So 2020 is a big growth year, apparently, for interest for her. She has this webinar. There's 4,000 educators that sign up across the country. There was ostensibly a wait list of school systems that wanted to work with her, the new products that would match students with research-based interventions. There's this quote that I found from Harvard's incubator startup lab that was early on in the iLab, I learned that the only thing we're beholden to is producing value and outcomes for the clients. In this case, school and school systems. In 2020, she acquires this tech developed by this other guy who's an economist and education tech expert that would send nudges via text message about missing assignments, grades, and other issues. By November 2020, she's raising her seed A round. And this is when it is alleged that she lies to investors in order to raise money. So, and I'll use the word lie, that's kind of a loaded word in journalism, but whatever, but it's just easier to say that. So in 2020, they had only $11,000 in revenue, but she told investors that they had brought in $3.7 million, according to the indictment, which is a very big gap. She also said in 2021 that there were 8 school systems that were using the technology, including New York, Atlanta, and Baltimore. But according to prosecutors, only 8 of the 2 school districts had contracts, and those 2 were Boston and Prince George's County. So in 2023, so this that's when the alleged activity happened. In 2023, she then, the company gets more attention because they're going to launch an AI-powered chatbot that would keep humans in the loop. But, guys, this set off more red flags for me than the lying to investors. Human moderators would oversee the AI chat with students, and it would be the chatbot was going to be called Ed. It was going to be an educational friend to help students. Ed could direct students towards academic and mental health resources, tell the students' parents whether the child attended class that day or the latest test scores. Ed could even detect and respond to emotions such as hostility, happiness, and sadness from the students. In an April speech by the LA the school district's superintendent, he said that Ed would have access to student data on test scores, mental health, physical health, and family socioeconomic status, which sounds like such a red flag for compliance.
Privacy nightmare.
Right. So Ed in 2024 was supposed to be used by some pretty big school districts, including LA. They said that they were serving 9,000 schools across 36 states. LA school district gives All Here $6 million to develop the chatbot, and it already netted the company $2 million. But by June 2024, two major investors and the company's accountants uncovered the disparity between All Here's purported financial outlook that she was presenting to investors and their actual outlook, which is why did it take the accountant so long to find this? Also, it's been 3 years. Okay, so then when she is confronted, she creates a fake email address where she poses as an All Here financial consultant and sends fake documents to the investors. Then she's fired by the board. All the staff's laid off or furloughed, and the All Here collapses. Crunchbase reports that All Here had raised $12 million in venture capital funding, and it's not clear if that figure includes the $6 million from LA or not. So she is accused of defrauding investors, lying about the company's profits, and falsely claiming that large school districts in the country, including New York, were her customers in order to fraudulently raise $10 million. The charges are wire fraud, securities fraud, and aggravated identity theft, because I guess you're not just allowed to create fake email addresses, which I thought we were a free country. So I was surprised about that. And she faces more than 40 years in prison. She also, they say in the indictment, used her inflated success to raise public profile, and that she sold some of her stake and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a down payment for a new home and on her wedding, which, in this economy, who among us? And so she hasn't been arrested, and the case doesn't appear to have, she has been arrested, but she hasn't gone to trial yet. So I don't know how much time she's actually going to get. In my last 15 seconds, I would like to surface that I don't know if this technology exists. What if the technology is good, but the 2020 numbers are bad? Would someone still invest in 2020? Also, don't lie about things that are verifiable. And also, this means that if you're lying that New York is one of your customers, it means that New York can never be one of your customers, right? Because then they're always going to be one of your customers. And then the FBI had a really stupid quote about how people who exploit educational opportunities for children will be taught a lesson. And that concludes my time. Alex. So that's Joanna Smith, Griffin. Alex, who did you pick?
Okay, first of all, I would like to say that you took more than 7 minutes.
Okay,
so
I was 7:10. I was 7:14, 7:10. I was
set a timer.
Doesn't apply. I
had a stopwatch.
You violated the rules of this exercise.
7:14. Okay, I'll give you 7. I'll give you 7. I'll give you 7:30, Alex.
Oh, wow. Okay, thank you. So generous. All right. Well, I'll see what I can do. Okay. I selected Fadria Prendergast. Let me take you back to the year 2023, not that long ago. We are in Europe. A big theme in startup land at the time was highlighting the personal stories of founders, especially those with compelling backgrounds that connected what they were building with a mission or purpose that drove them. Mikula, I'm sure you got a million of those press releases. I certainly did. One particular focus back then, and rightly so, was spotlighting female entrepreneurs who weren't getting the attention that they deserved. Into this ecosystem steps Fadria Prendergast, who made Forbes 30 Under 30 Europe list in the media and marketing category, the one that Kiah is jealous she was never included in. All right, so what immediately happens? She wins this award. She is then, about a couple of months later, investigated by Forbes, who was alerted to a number of allegations against her company, WOTC, Women of the City, which is a online magazine. They investigate those allegations and revoked Prendergast's access to the under 30 community, and then published the details of their investigation, detailed in a story in Forbes on July 7th, 2023. This is, as far as I can tell, the only time that Forbes has investigated someone that they had named to 30 under 30 and broke the story of what had happened. I'm going to try to summarize this story as quickly as I can, but it is crazy, so please stay with me. All right. Narrowly speaking, the allegations against Prendergast are: multiple former clients described Women of the City, which again is a online magazine supposedly sort of highlighting female entrepreneurs, as a pay-to-play scheme where you would pay money, get promised coverage or visibility in the magazine, and then not receive what you were sold. Victims were small business owners, largely women, who paid for publicity packages, features, or related services. And the way it would work is that WOTC would DM them on Instagram, complimenting them on the work that they had done, offering to spotlight them, and then abruptly ask for payment, and after receiving payment, just stop responding and ghost them entirely. Over the course of, it sounds like Forbes found at least 11 customers who were defrauded by WOTC. Losses totaled at about $195,000. So that is narrowly the problem with Fadria Prendergast. However, it gets weirder and worse. Okay, now we're going to ramp it up. The Forbes investigation also found that WOTC was created by the Salvation Proclaimers Anointed Church, or, Jason, get ready for this, SPAC Nation, as it is known.
Yeah!
Do they
SPAC
worship
Nation.
Chamath or what?
Hey, I don't think crimes are crimes if they're funny. I'm just going to go on the record right now. Crimes are not crimes if they're funny.
This is funny as hell, although not in certain places, but for the most part, very funny. SPAC Nation is a church nonprofit / cult that was founded in London in 2008 by Pastor Toby Adeboyia, who has been accused of fraud, financial exploitation, and child abuse. Child abuse, that's the part that's not so funny. Prendergast apparently joined the church in 2017 and quickly rose up through the ranks under the tutelage of another member, Miriam Mola. And Kiah, here is a person who I think you should get to know. Miriam Mola, in her self-published memoir, which was titled Catch Her If You Can, describes herself as an influencer, self-styled girl boss, and unrelenting businesswoman. She served prison time in the UK, Spain, and Belgium on at least 13 fraud convictions. And by the time WOTC was created, apparently as her brainchild, she was so well known in Europe that she couldn't be the face of WOTC, which is where our friend Fadria Prendergast comes in. So she becomes the face of WOTC. Now, it's unclear if WOTC ever transferred funds to SPAC Nation. Both parties deny to Forbes that this happened. However, Forbes claims that SPAC Nation did aggressively solicit WOTC staff and writers for donations. Donating in SPAC Nation language was called sowing, and donations were called seed. I'm so sorry I had to share that detail, but once I learned it, I couldn't unknow it, so I had to make sure you knew it too. Adeboyia, the church leader, apparently lives very large. He has a mansion in England's affluent Surrey County. He has a $130,000 diamond ring with SPAC Nation slogan, "The harvest is ready." Again, I'm so sorry. And drives a $200,000 Lamborghini with the vanity plate "Pastor."
Yes.
SPAC Nation's primary company was dissolved by the UK's High Court in June 2022 after an insolvency service investigation found that the organization could not properly account for $2.4 million of expenditure, a reconciliation problem, which we spent a lot of time on in Fintech. And now that brings us to today. The church has rebranded itself. It now refers to itself as the Nation Family, although replacing the A's in Nation Family with X's, which makes it spelled very weird. It boasts having a wealth building arm known as Wealth Nation. And an
that's a
online
Ponzi scheme or an MLM,
arm,
for sure.
For sure, called the Family TV. WOTC has been liquidated, but Prendergast has formed a new magazine with the name The W, where she is its global editor-in-chief and CEO. It is unclear if her magazine is connected to Nation Family still, although that wouldn't be a stretch. As far as I can tell, Prendergast has not actually been charged with any crimes.
Where's the crime here, Alex?
There is no crime. There is no crime. Although I will say on your original list, you gave other options were for people who were not charged with crime. So I'm not violating any rules here.
All right.
However, I do think there are a couple interesting things that I'll use my last minute to describe.
You get a minute.
First, it is a small amount of money in the grand scheme of things, so we should say that. Second, I think there is an argument that Prendergast is, in some senses, a victim, because if this is a multi-level marketing scheme, which in a lot of ways it sounds like, then she wasn't at the top. Forbes reporting makes it sound a lot more like she was sort of recruited into this organization and pushed out as the front person for other people's schemes. Having said that, she clearly has screwed over a bunch of female entrepreneurs, which I find deeply reprehensible. And on a societal level, I think this is an interesting window into how much tolerance we've built into our system for low-level fraud and white-collar crime, and the role that social media and storytelling plays in fraud. And Kiah, I have 7 seconds left, but I'm going to yield them to you.
I have stopped when we've interrupted you, or I think I should get my time back because I made everyone laugh for 3 seconds. So, yeah, Alex, if you do not know about Nexium, you should look up Nexium.
I was thinking the same thing. Nexium is like the quintessential cult / Ponzi schemer MLM
/ girl boss.
Oh yeah.
She is amazing, and I will say, since you are giving me a tiny bit of my time back, the one funny anecdote I found was you read the Forbes reporting, and it's quite this long story that goes into the church and her connections to it and all these different things. But when they reached out to Prendergast to ask for comment, she didn't answer any of their questions. Instead, she inquired about potential business opportunities for her new magazine via
Always
Forbes,
be closing. What a girl boss.
She said, should you have potential clients that you wish to recommend, I can guarantee that they will be treated well and will have the best services from my editorial team, which is just like chef's kiss. It's perfect.
Yes. Yeah. No crimes committed. Okay. Jason. You ready to go?
I'm ready, and I have my timer. I did not practice this, so we'll see. Okay. Mine is a little bit closer to home in the sense that it is specifically financial. And I guess we all apparently chose women because I'm doing Carolyn Ellison.
Women's wrongs. Let's go.
So I'm sure that, all of our listeners are very familiar with FTX, but the whole FTX crypto crime saga primarily focused on Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF. And I'll admit, while I'm familiar with the Forbes 30 under 30 list, I don't think that I have ever actually read any of these brief bios. And so I guess I'm going to use some of my 7 minutes to read Carolyn Ellison, who is actually co-listed alongside her co-CEO at Alameda, which was the trading firm associated with FTX. And so I'm going to go ahead and read the 133 words. Quote, in August 2021, billionaire Alameda founder Sam Bankman-Fried promoted the traders to co-CEOs, so this is Carolyn Ellison and Sam Trubico, so that he could focus on his FTX cryptocurrency exchange. By charging basis points on 5 billion volume a day, the quantitative trading firm makes about 3 to 4 million daily. By investing that income into blockchain platforms like Uniswap and Compound, that connect lenders and borrowers with little overhead, Alameda generates an additional 7% to 50% annualized, depending on the asset. Both natives of Boston, Ellison wrote her MIT professor dad an economics paper analyzing stuffed animals' prices when she was 8 years old before getting a bachelor's. Yeah, exactly. That's the right answer. Before getting a bachelor's degree in mathematics from Stanford and a job at Jane Street, where she met Sam Bankman-Fried. Trubico is a former competitive Scrabble player.
These are the coolest people. These are the coolest
people.
people.
Who studied computer science at MIT, where he also met the Alameda co-founder. So even reading that brief, that is the profile that appeared in 2022 in Forbes. Like, immediately the numbers on how Alameda was allegedly making money just intuitively sound insane to me. Like, they're charging basis points on 5 billion that is supposedly the volume that Alameda is trading, and then investing that in these like yield gen protocols. But I digress. So Allison and Trubico become co-CEOs in October 2021. She is 27 at the time she appears on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. And she becomes the sole CEO of Alameda after Trubico abruptly steps down the following year in August 2022, essentially citing...
Great business decision.
If there's anything we've learned from watching these scams, it's get out before they blow up. Because Trubico essentially was citing burnout and bought a couple of giant houses in San Francisco overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge and a multi-million-dollar yacht. So I think he made the right call there. Allison's involvement in the scandal further complicated by the fact that she was in an on-again, off-again relationship with Sam Bankman-Fried, a factor that she and her attorneys actually used as part of the court case to try to sort of deflect blame onto SBF, sort of painting him as
like the leader,
manipulating
and she was
her,
just following orders,
taking advantage of her, youth, naivety, the fact that he's essentially her boss in this relationship and whatnot. So, as I imagine folks will remember, 2022, not a great year for the crypto industry. FTX, after bailing out a lot of other failed crypto firms earlier in the year, ultimately collapses in November. And about 1 month later, Ellison goes ahead and pleads guilty to 7 charges: conspiracy to commit wire fraud on FTX customers, conspiracy to commit wire fraud on Alameda's lenders. So Alameda essentially was kind of like a hedge fund or an investment company, and it was borrowing crypto from other companies like BlockFi, like Three Arrows Capital and whatnot. So she caught to committing fraud on those lenders. Wire fraud on Alameda's lenders, conspiracy to commit commodities fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The charges carried...
The conspiracy charges are so interesting. Sorry, I'll stop my recording, but the conspiracy charges are so interesting because it's like, did she do it or did she not do it, So, sorry, that's my 2 cents, but I'll go back to it.
My very, very surface level understanding, and I did not spend the time to research this, is like, you have the first order charge of like doing the thing, so doing the wire fraud, and then the second order charge of like, she coordinated with other people to do that.
Yeah, that's fair.
And gives more leverage in the negotiations. So she faced up to a maximum possible sentence of 110 years for these charges, but she cooperated extensively with prosecutors and functionally served as the star witness testifying against SBF in his 2023 trial. Over 3 days of testimony, she methodically described the fraud, repeatedly attributing direction to SBF. She said, quote, "Sam directed me to commit these crimes," and, quote, "he directed us to take customer money to pay loans." She further described how SBF built the systems that allowed the fraud and how he was the ultimate decision maker at both companies, FTX and at Alameda, despite the fact that she technically had this title as co-CEO and then later as CEO. Her testimony was also often emotional. She cried while reading text messages that she had sent SBF after the collapse, calling it, quote, "overall the worst week of my life." I should say probably yes, that should count as the worst week of your life. But due to her cooperation, she was sentenced to, guesses anyone? A mere 24 months in prison.
Oh, I was going to say 1 year, so I would have been under.
Well, she was also barred from serving as a director or officer of a public company or crypto exchange for 10 years. Feels fair.
For 10 years?
And she had to forfeit $10 billion? But she began her sentence in November 2024. She was transferred to a halfway house in October 2025, and she was released this January 2026 after serving just 14 months, thanks both to credit for good behavior and the First Step Act, which I believe was actually signed into law by President Trump. It is worth noting, as I run up on my time here, involved in all of these allegations include that Ellison transferred $22.5 million from Alameda to her personal account on FTX, then transferred $10 million to her personal bank account and used it to invest in an unnamed AI safety and research firm. So, as much blame as she deflected on SBF and other people here, it feels like she demonstrated some awareness and participation. And I'll leave my summary there.
All right. Okay. I will say we're going over a little bit of time, but we're not going a lot of time. So I think that's good. Okay. My final person is Charlie Javis. I always want to say Jarvis, and it's Javis. So I'm just going to call her Charlie. So Charlie is on the Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2019. Let me take you back to 2019. It is the last normal year because COVID is going to happen the next year. And so the first COVID case is recorded in 2019, which is why it has the 19 at the end. I also personally have some big life changes. I stopped being eligible for the 30 Under 30 list this year.
This is an undercurrent of the whole discussion.
This is a very personal topic. I didn't realize how impactful it was.
Guys, these are my peers. What are you talking about? Okay, so I moved to Nashville and I started a new job at Bank Director. Notre Dame catches on fire this year. The U.S. women will win the World Cup. And 1 million people protest in Hong Kong. And Boeing has a 737 crash, and all the planes get grounded. So I don't know if that helps you bring you back. So Wharton grad Charlie had founded a student financial aid application assistance company called Frank in 2016. Neither of you guys have had the pleasure of filling out a FAFSA form for your children. I am under the impression that it's significantly, it wasn't easy when we filled it out. If you did fill it out, it is harder now. And FAFSA is federal student aid or loans. And you fill it out to help determine broad eligibility. And then the schools that you apply to will ask for your FAFSA form. So everyone should be filling out this form if they intend to go to college. Frank was a website that helped students fill it out. It was launched in 2016. It was supposed to help them complete more than 100 questions in a couple of minutes. And a lot of these questions involve your parents' financial situation. So there's this huge coordination issue. And it also was a little bit broader than just the form. It was supposed to help you identify scholarships, grants. It could even give you a cash advance if the Frank had identified that you're likely eligible for financial assistance. They would front you $5,000, and then you could use that money to register for classes or books before you got your money, before you got your financial aid. In 2017, though, the U.S. Department of Education was like, hey, stop putting the letters FAFSA in your URL. So she has to change it. So that was maybe one of the first hints that she was maybe aggressive on the marketing is maybe how I'll say it. In 2018, Frank raises a crazy $10 million from different investors. It has 18 full-time employees, and she makes obviously in 2019, she's on Forbes list. We know about her because in September 2021, she sells her company to JP Morgan Chase, which is the largest bank in the country by assets, for $175 million. And she joins the bank as a managing director who is going to oversee student-focused products. JPM says that they're going to buy this to deepen ties with potential college students, early college students. She, as part of the acquisition, receives $9 million in stock proceeds and a $20 million retention bonus. A year later, while she's an employee, they file a lawsuit for fraud against her. They also allege that the company had paid a data scientist $18,000 to create users that had like fake emails, fake names, and addresses. And they had purchased a list from a marketing firm to just make it seem like they had more users than they did. They discover this. Apparently, like the first hint that something was wrong was that JP Morgan sent out an email marketing campaign and 70% of the emails came back as unreturned. She countersues them, claiming that she was being scapegoated for their own faulty due diligence. She is suspended in 2022 following this lawsuit. They are indicted. She and her co-founder are indicted in 2023 in a Manhattan federal court for securities fraud, bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. In March 2025, they were found guilty on all counts. And then in September, she was sentenced to 85 months imprisonment. She was ordered to forfeit her illegally obtained pay from the company, her stock, her bonuses, and her year salary as a managing director. They also incurred $100 million in legal fees that the bank had to pay for because while they were suing her, she was an employee of the bank, and her contract that she had inked with the bank when she sold Frank included that, which I like. Again, props to that attorney. $100 million, like that's an admirable amount of money to spend in 2 years. So nice job. But the bank got that back from her when she was found guilty. So this crime is really interesting to me, and you guys know, and I have shared this in private dinner conversations where other people have disagreed with me, but I kind of think that there's a lot to be said about who's obviously 300,000 people is a lot of people. $10 million for a website that helps you fill out student loan aid is, I think, too much money. And I don't know what the implicit value was there, but certainly there were some incentives that were indicating that this was maybe more valuable than, and maybe pressuring her to lie about this or to misrepresent it. I also kind of think that there is a responsibility, you should have done better due diligence on this. I don't know what kind of access they had, but if they can't look at the list and verify these people exist, or how many high school students have graduated in the last couple of years that would kind of populate a list, and 300,000 is probably the right amount. And so in conclusion, I think this is a funny story. And I think JP Morgan missed her tricks and overpaid. This is less a story about crime and justice and more a story about crime and vengeance. And that concludes the show and tell portion of this podcast. And now we will move on to the discussion portion. So I want your guys' thoughts based on what you've heard and kind of what you know about the space and what we've already talked about. Why do you think the Forbes 30 for 30 sort of identifies these people without knowing that they're identifying it? And what kind of questions do you have about Forbes's due diligence to even get on this list?
Okay, can I go first?
Yes, go for it.
Like I said, I was aware that this list existed. I was not aware of the mechanics of how the list is formulated. So I did spend my coffee time this morning reviewing the last 5 or so years, specifically in the finance category. And it seems that who the judges for the category are have a very strong bearing on the sort of spectrum from scammy, fraudy, bombastic to a little bit more benign and boring. So for example, 1 year you had judges like Bill Ackman, which I don't love Bill Ackman, but he's a pretty sort of, traditional finance type. But then a different year you have judges that include Cathie Wood from ARK, or Vitalik Buterin, the guy who invented Ethereum. So I guess my running hypothesis is who the judges are and sort of their mentality seems to play a strong role in influencing the, let's say, the caliber or maybe perhaps the pathology of the people who are selected for these lists. I didn't check the other categories, so I'd be curious to what extent it extends, but that's my running theory at the moment.
Alex, what do you think? What do you think about how this list gets created and who gets on it?
I mean, I agree with that. I think that the one thing that we don't really know, because I think it depends, I guess, on like the individual circumstances, is you can nominate yourself for Forbes 30 Under 30, or you can be nominated by someone else. And I think that is really interesting because self-nominations are treated with the same level of consideration as those submitted by others, but I don't think that Forbes should evaluate those the same. A theory I have, and I don't know if this is true or not, but a theory I have is that a high percentage of the bad people on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list over the years were self-nominated. And so
what if you got like a close friend to nominate you, though? You ever do like a singles? You ever like nominate one of your friends for like a most eligible bachelors, and you've got to like hype your friend up? Yeah,
and that could be too. But like if it is coming from you, if you are seeking to be on the list, and you see this, right? Because people after they are named to Forbes 30 Under 30 will oftentimes go on social media and say how honored they are to have been on Forbes 30 Under 30. And I guess my running theory on this is that there's a bit of a self-selection bias where if you nominate yourself, or if you get someone to nominate you, but then you act all surprised, like, I can't believe it, this is amazing, it's an honor just to be nominated. I think that speaks to a pathology and a sort of mindset and an ego that you have that probably overlaps quite a bit with crime, or at least a willingness to sort of tolerate crime. I also think that one of the sort of things that we had as a common thread across most of the stories that were just told is like a insistence on doubling down and tripling down on the lie, right? I mean, your first example, Joanna, like, it wasn't so much the initial thing as it was like every opportunity she had to like come clean, she just didn't, and then went to like more extreme lengths to try to like lie.
But this isn't none of these industries like they don't incentivize truth telling. You don't get points for telling the truth, right?
No, not at all. And so I think that like if you are doing well in those industries, you are the type of person who probably is comfortable lying, and you probably, the ego hit of like telling the truth and like admitting that you weren't as good as they thought they were, or just like coming clean, probably isn't consistent with the like psychological makeup of the people who submit themselves for Forbes 30 Under 30. So I think there's probably a relationship there. Can I also say just briefly that, I don't know if you guys found this, but Forbes did publish their own Hall of Shame list. Did you see that?
They did.
I did not see that.
I came across it.
It's amazing. And I want to read one part of it, which is they said, Forbes has published our 30 Under 30 lists, which in the U.S. has now 20 different categories, or 600 total, each year. Add in the alumni from our Europe and Asia lists, and we've honored more than 10,000 wonderkins and vetted 100,000 candidates. An astounding number of these folks have gone on to become cultural tastemakers, tech titans, and even billionaires. But regrets, we've had a few. While our process correctly weeded out folks like Fire Festival impresario Billy McFarland, and yes, even Elizabeth Holmes. So maybe she was submitted herself, but they didn't put her in, which I don't know the story on that.
They didn't put her in on that. They put her in their magazine. You don't get credit
she had the cover.
So you don't really get credit for that. One-time superstars who all wound up fraudsters, others slipped through. Below are 10 out of 10,000 that we'd like to walk back. We'll add more here as the years go on. The 30 Under 30 list is by definition future-facing, and not even Warren Buffett can predict with 100% accuracy, but we'd guess that he'd be good with 99.9%.
I genuinely, though, expect more of a journalist. Like,
that's not an acknowledgement that your list is flawed in any way, shape, or form.
The list is, and the notoriety of the list would be, I think, something as a like, again, I can only kind of speak as my process as a journalist and kind of the grain of salt and even just resistance of the great man theory, like that there's the hierarchy of wanting to say these people are kind of amazing and there's something amazing about them. And that's why they do these amazing things. And I think that it creates like a lot of incentives for lying, because that's what you're rewarding.
Well, that's a great point, because the other thing that I think is really interesting about all of this, and I think we've probably talked about this on podcasts in the past, is to your point about the great man theory, these things work or don't work more based on luck and circumstance and timing than anything else, right? And so I do think it's a really great point that the sort of cult of personality, where it's like this one person bent the universe in a different direction and their success is entirely due to like their innate characteristics, I think that is a very flawed understanding of how companies succeed and how products succeed that really is not at all tethered to reality. But the more we sort of like pour gas on that myth, the more we sort of incentivize like these types of people to seek out this recognition. So there is a feedback loop that I think is problematic.
So why do you guys, okay, one, how many early stage startups do you think tell something that's not true to an investor in order to get money? Like what percentage of like all, if you had to guess? And then two, can you tell me what due diligence actually looks like for investors? That I think one of the things is like, there's the lie, but the lie works. Like there's like kind of two elements to that. So like the lie's not getting caught. And, you know, I think for some of these, like I picked examples where I feel like there was actually a pretty easy way to verify the veracity of the lie itself. So do you guys have a sense of like those two things? Because I'm just confused how we always get here. And then how the investors want to say like, well, I'm the victim, when it's like, no, but you didn't do your job. Like you had one job, you know?
So I do struggle using the word lie for the reasons, Kiah, that you alluded to earlier. For a number of reasons, right? It implies both. The person is like knowingly doing this as opposed to sort of believing, pardon my language, believing their own bullshit or believing their own self-deception. I mean, I think I would imagine that particularly the earliest stage companies are the ones that are most inclined to dissemble, exaggerate, claim to have features they don't have. To what extent should there be, culpability, whether legal culpability or just sort of like reputational culpability among the investors, that to your point, like what due diligence did you do? This was highly salient as I was thinking about the Contigo story, not to make this about that, but it's like all these, individual angel investors, Y Combinator, Accelerator, Coinbase invested in this company. Are they dumb and they didn't realize there were problems? Or were they lazy and incompetent and just not do due diligence to understand the company they were investing in? Or were they doing this knowingly? Like, were they fully aware that there were potential legal regulatory problems, but thought that, the potential upside of the investment paying off was worth whatever that risk was? And, I guess I have a little bit more sympathy towards individual like angel investors in the earliest rounds, where it's like, oh, I cut a $5,000 check or a $50,000 check or, into this company because, I'm in the space. I knew the founders, or my buddies knew the founders. When it gets to more institutional capital, I have a harder time accepting that, where it's like, okay, if you're NICA or your whatever, VC fund that in turn has LPs that you are accountable to, or you're supposed to be accountable to, like you presumably are or should be doing a level of due diligence to understand what you're investing in. But I mean, again, the JPMC Charlie Javis story is just like, how could the largest bank in the United States not detect this? Like, what?
Well, Alex, you kind of also, like, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I think about how you talk about with credit, lending money is easy, getting paid back is hard. And I think about all the work that you have to do to submit, like, I can pay back the money, and the money is smaller than 175 million, or, and these amounts are smaller. And I get that there's maybe like a standardization or a legibility there. What do you think about the kind of misrepresentation of users, or like what I was talking about this morning, which is like, how important is it to have active users versus to have real tech? And why, like, if we're incentivizing users over tech, are we upset that people are lying about users and not the tech?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, I think one of the things that's challenging about this is that anything, especially stuff that's connected to startups, a lot of it is more, the old joke about like driving a Prius, and the reason people drive a Prius is because they want people to think certain things about them. So it's not so much that they care about whatever like the thing is, they care how they're perceived. So they drive a Prius so people will say certain things about them. I think the same thing generally applies with startups and the way they interface with the broader world, right? Like Chase wants to buy Frank because of what people will think. Oh, look, Chase is being so aggressive about acquiring fintech and taking this threat of disruption seriously. Like, I don't think it was ever really motivated by a desire for users or for tech. I think it was more just like, we need to throw a little bit of money down so that we can tell our investors that we're taking the threat of fintech seriously. And I think that like how you value these things, right? I'll use my example with Fadria. Like she would court small business owners and offer to feature them in the magazine. Well, if you're a small business owner, is being featured in this magazine really going to in any way like drive your business or add value for your business? Probably not. It probably has more to do with your own ego and wanting to be featured in this place, right? And so I think that there's a tension between the lies or the self-deception that the people and the companies practice, but then also like kind of the lie or self-deception that the companies either buying from them or investing in them. Like there's sort of a self-deception on both sides. Like, again, we all sort of want to like glom onto this idea of like disruption and sort of like valorizing this concept. But I feel like that self-deception on both sides is kind of what leads to all of these problems. And Kiah, maybe this gets to the next point on your outline, but I think when that goes wrong or when it's proven to be not true, like who's the victim in that circumstance? And I think that is an interesting question, and one that, as I look at our 4 nominees here, I think the answer is a little bit different depending on each one.
So Alex, I think what you bring up a good point, and that one that I want to talk about is that when we think about crime, we got to think about like kind of what the laws are involved. And there's some quantification here that's very like, I think, legible, but also like who's the victim and like who got hurt by this. And, I kind of have this like, I've got this whole thing with white collar crime. Like, how the hell can you lose $60 to $90 million in Synapse and have all that user fund go missing? And as far as I can tell, it's not a crime yet. No one's been charged yet. There are no victims yet. Like, and I know that like, that's not true in the like lived sense, but like in the legible sense, like who has a case here, who has to be held account. And so I always think that's so interesting to compare, the experience, Jason's, documentation of these white collar, maybe crimes relative to the crimes that we have here and the crimes we selected and who gets to be a victim. So like, when, do you guys feel like the angel investors and the venture capital funds of America are the most, sympathetic victims? Or like, I kind of think that their faulty due diligence, their messed up incentives are creating these situations, that are regular, like, and then they use the law to clean up the mess instead of them actually learning their lesson and changing their incentives and doing a better job. Like, that's my hot take, is like, steal more of these people's money. Maybe they'll learn.
No, but this is interesting because there's also a disincentive for investors to admit that they got duped because it makes them look dumb, right? Like I'm trying to remember which, it may have been in the Theranos, like one of the books or articles about Theranos, that like, to actually come forward, or no, maybe I'm thinking of Uber and pushing out Travis, or I'm mixing up like 9 different things in my head. But as a VC or as an investor, like, there are multiple rounds of this game, and to actually pursue either civil litigation or participate in a criminal prosecution against a company or against an individual that you invested in, like, people are going to know that the next time you are competing to invest in a certain deal. And I would presume in most, if not all cases, that becomes a negative. So it's like, I see both sides of this, Kiah, to your point. Like, there are the VC funds, the angel investors who are investing in these companies, potentially without doing adequate due diligence to prevent these kinds of situations, are creating an incentive structure that allows this to happen. But then they also have incentives, in some cases anyway, like not to bring it to light and not to pursue remediation that's available to them, particularly civil. Like, how it looks so bad to have a VC sue a founder or sue a company they invested in. I mean, one of my other favorite frauds, Solid, like, would fit neatly in this bucket, in that they faked revenue and they ultimately did get sued by their lead investor to claw back at least part of that investment. Yeah, and the optics on that are terrible as the investor.
Well, and it's interesting because, to Jason's point, like, as an investor, you are competing for a founder to choose you, right? Like, there are not enough founders and too many VCs, and so, like, you are competing.
That's their own problem too. Like, this is not a problem.
Well, I mean, and it's interesting though, because, like, Chase is very different, right? Like, Chase, they don't care if the future startup founders think they're a good guy or a bad guy. Like, they don't have that same incentive, and so, like, they're going to come down on Charlie really harsh because that is, not the same incentive. I also think the other thing that's interesting, and maybe FTX is a good example of this, is a lot of times when these things break, there's end users that are hurt, there's investors that arguably are hurt, and then there's the company or the individual who perpetrated the fraud. And I think you have to draw distinctions between those categories, because, like, I don't feel bad at all for FTX investors, right? Like, I don't feel bad at all. Like, that's just a massive failure of due diligence, as that Sequoia story sort of illustrates. Like, they weren't paying attention to the red flags. But I think the end users, like, a question I always ask is, like, should the victims have known better? Is there something they could have done to prevent this from happening? Like, you would have no idea as an FTX customer, like, what's happening. And I think actually my person, Fadria, kind of falls into this category too. Like, I don't think there's any way for the small business owner to, like, parse out that, like, this wasn't legitimate. It looked legitimate, and it was just sort of like, oh yeah, I gave them the money and then they never called me back. And so I think some cases there are victims where, and that's why I'm actually okay with, like, the punishment coming down on Caroline and SBF. Like, FTX, like, hurt a lot of, like, individual users who had no other real recourse. And so to me, that one is a little different.
I think the thing about FTX, the reason why, like, I personally think that's a crime is because we don't want companies to intermingle customer funds, right? Like, that's really important to the entire system. Right. Yeah. So we don't want, like, I don't want to say we don't want banks to do that per se, because, like, that's a little different, but, like, it's very important to, like, a trust bank. If you say we don't use customer funds for our own operations, that you don't use customer funds for your own operations. And that is also, like, to me, that's the original crime. And then you have to do a series of things to hide that you're doing that. And that's kind of the cover up. And that's, like, I want to say that's the lie, right? That's what you're lying about, but there's actually something you're trying to hide, versus I think in some of these cases where there's a misrepresentation where you're just trying to say, like, I have a real product, and you don't care about that. What you care about is how many people use my real product. So that's what I have to lie about.
The revenue one. I mean, I thought, what was your Joanna one? It was $11,000 in revenue, and she said $3 million.
$3 million, which is
is there a scale question too? Because I think that does speak a little bit to, like, the individual and, like, how their brain works. Like, having $11,000 in revenue and saying $3 million is a wild thing to do. Like, that is crazy.
You can lie, but, like, you gotta tell, like, a lie that's a little bit more, like that makes closer
Charlie
to truth.
Seem sort of, like, normal by comparison. Like, her lie was, like, way less orders of magnitude than that one. So I think the scale of the deception matters too a little bit.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think another factor in this, which I often find really kind of unsatisfying is certain cases are just easier to prove from a legal prosecution standpoint, right? And I know that Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos was not on our 30 under 30 list, but ultimately, if I remember correctly, what she got convicted for was defrauding her investors.
Not end users. Yep.
Not the patients who got a test saying that they had cancer or that they were HIV positive when they weren't, or that they were having a miscarriage. And so there was very real, very substantial harm that, thousands, tens of thousands of people experienced. But ultimately, sort of like the cost benefit of, if we're going to prosecute this person, what facts do we have available? What charges do those support? And how do we, do we as a society, or we, a Department of Justice, when we used to have one that worked, like, how do we want to use that tool to hold people accountable, given the reality that there are limited resources? And in that case, it was, hey, it's easier to prove that she defrauded her investors by telling them she had a magic box that could test one drop of blood, than it was to prosecute a case that she had done, these other things to people who had taken these fraudulent tests.
Yeah, I think especially with Theranos, and we can kind of say this about Synapse too, is like there's the quantifiability aspect where the investors invested X amount of dollars. And so you can quantify the harm relative to that. Whereas with Theranos end users, we have ways to calculate emotional damage and distress, but they don't, that number of receiving a false positive or a false negative, and we don't adequately weight that in the millions. Or if you think about Synapse, there's a lot of money missing, but that might just be $10,000. It might be $10,000 for you and $20,000 for you. And so that's actually a pretty small amount of money, because we're not adding in the stress or the anxiety of not having that money. And it's the same with FTX, right? There were people who got their money at the end of the bankruptcy, but they didn't actually get the appreciation. They got kind of what their value, their holding was when they went into bankruptcy, and they were complaining about that. And that's kind of I get it, but
SBF is just if you would have let me continue to invest in Anthropic,
yeah, I actually would have been good for the money. I think
money would have come back. I mean, it's a good point though, because I think the other thing that it kind of touches on, and it struck me when I was researching my case, there is just a ROI consideration to law enforcement and white collar crime that I didn't totally appreciate before, where it's if you scam people, but you stay under a certain threshold, you're just not worth our time and resources to go after you. Or in the case of Synapse, if it's just complex enough and we can't untangle it, it's just not worth the juice isn't worth the squeeze to try to get to the bottom of this.
Or we can't use the law system to hold someone accountable, because we can't build the case to hold them accountable.
Right. Which kind of means no one is committed with crime. Is too high. Yeah. And so it's I think there is a missing accountability loop to a lot of different types of white collar crime, where it's we can't make the case, the costs are too much, we have other priorities. I mean, the FTX one, the reason they made that a priority, or Theranos is another good example, had as much to do with it being high profile as anything else, right? It wasn't necessarily
it was big enough. It was big enough that it drove a news cycle and people paid attention. I mean, I think it sounds very maybe cold to say this, but it's Synapse Evolve. It was only $100 million-ish.
Right.
It just wasn't big enough to drive enough outrage that it became a thing. I mean, maybe knock on whatever, maybe we will still one day see
I don't want to discount that possibility, but I think when we talk, it's hard for me to sometimes think, especially with Charlie and Frank, that that was a problem in the scheme of what I see are really other, big problems, especially, thinking about Synapse or some other situations of just, again, who gets to be a victim and who gets their rights represented in court.
JPMC is a victim and JPMC gets its right.
When something annoys Jamie Dimon, it finds its way as a priority.
Which is, I think, is bad for society. I don't think we should I think that's corrosive long-term for society. And, all of us are watching, CFTC Commissioner Siegelig say things that I was under the impression when he testified in the Senate, he they are in conflict. And, you know, again, lie is a loaded word, but he said things in Senate testimony to get confirmed that he is now saying different things. And so the question is like, is there no consequence for do they not, is it not a big deal to testify in front of the Senate? Do you not need to say things that are true in front of the Senate? Should there not be consequences for you, especially if you are taking actions that might have harm in the future? I'm so lying. If it's okay to lie, then it's okay to lie.
Well, and
you know what I mean?
That to me that gets to the root of the whole thing, and it kind of goes back to the earlier question you asked about your relationship to white collar crime. I mean, you use the word corrosive. I think that is exactly the right word, right? Because it's not, in some senses, the harm that's being caused, someone's house isn't getting broken into, right? Someone isn't being assaulted or murdered. So it's a different category of crime in some senses. But I think corrosive is the right word, because when you tolerate lying, when there should be an expectation that you tell the truth, you are having a corrosive effect on society and the relationships that we have with each other. And that to me is why I actually wish white-collar crime was taken much more seriously and was prosecuted much more rigorously and fairly across the board with everybody, because I do think lying matters, and the corrosive effect it has on society is terrible. And I feel like a lot of the feedback loops we've been talking about between VC investors and founders, or between founders and publications like Forbes that want to have people, clamoring to be on this list, I think those feedback loops do create incentives to lie, small or big, or start small and become bigger over time. And that does corrode society, and that sucks.
Well, and I would add not just having a corrosive effect, but there's also a very real negative economic impact. I mean, one of the ways that I like to think about this is high trust societies versus low trust societies.
Oh, yeah.
And this is not to make this super overly personal, but it's I spend time in Mexico, where I am now, and I spend time in the Netherlands, and I spend time in the United States. And the Netherlands is a very, very high trust society. And this manifests itself in how people conduct business. So, for example, I will always remember this story. Before I moved there, I was trying to send flowers to somebody, and I was doing it online on a website, and I filled out this web form, and I was weird. There was I didn't pay. There was no way to pay for this, so it must not have worked. And so I went somewhere else and then ordered and sent them. It worked. That florist delivered flowers to the person I was trying to send them to, and then emailed me an invoice. And I was what? This isn't how e-commerce works. You're just hoping that some random person on the internet is going to pay this invoice.
Payable on delivery, man. That's how we used to run things in society.
Once you've already delivered the good, and now you're going to come to me later and ask me to pay you, and it sticks in my mind because it's such a wild story that would not happen in the United States or happen in Mexico. And I guess I use that to illustrate that, take that to sort of the nth degree, and it bakes into the kinds of transaction costs of, hey, if I am going to invest and I assume everyone is lying to me, faking their user numbers, faking their revenue, the amount of due diligence that I want to do is going to be orders of magnitude higher. So the friction to getting that transaction done, it is orders of magnitude higher.
I mean, I think more people should adopt journalist techniques, especially in this AI age and whatever. But part of it's trust but verify. And that's just it's not personal, but, that I actually assume someone could tell me something that's not true. And if I don't take the work to verify it and then adequately cite it in a piece, the criticism comes back to me. It doesn't necessarily come back to the person who told me that thing. The onus is on me. And I don't know if that makes me high trust or low trust. I think journalists says we're the fourth estate, right? We're interested in holding everyone accountable. But part of it is that we have this natural suspicion against people who will tell us things, and we should question their incentives and motives to tell us this thing and not take them at their word. And I'm not putting any money on the line. I'm actually merely putting my reputation on the line and trusting, how Alex says, there will be an ROI that to me and to this person, right? And that, but you're right. I guess I live in a low trust. I have a low trust orientation to the world. Investors have this high trust orientation to the world. But I also then think they only have high trust because they're sheltered from the consequences of their low trust. And I do need to wrap this up. So like, Alex, I'll give you a last word and Jason will give you a last word. And then we need to talk about our rankings. So Alex, go.
Yes. So very clarifying exercise, because I think talking all of these out, there are degrees of badness. And I hadn't really thought that way before. So I definitely found, like, I used to think of Forbes 30 under 30. If nothing else, I've
achieved that.
Yeah, like Forbes 30 under 30 bad guy list used to just be one block of bad names in my head. Now, having parsed a bunch of them, there's definitely a difference between them, and very clarifying exercise in that way.
Jason?
I mean, I would want to echo what Alex is saying. And two, I guess, on the one hand, has it served to increase my already very high level of cynicism? Yes.
Good.
Do I also think that that is a reasonable way to view the world, particularly sort of given where things have evolved to in 2026? Yes.
Yeah, you're well served by this point of view right now, and also I like to think that I'm realistic, but I'm actually probably pessimistic. You know what I mean? And I think I think the true crime stuff helps with that, but also I think that's useful. I think that's a better way to approach the world. All right, so we're gonna do ranked choice voting. We're gonna start with Alex. I want you to list off your list from not a crime to big crime.
Okay.
Go.
All right. So, not a crime to big crime. I'm gonna go. Gosh, this is tough. Of the four we have, I think I'm gonna go Charlie. Not a crime. I hate to do it,
yes!
but I think of the four we have, I would say that one not a crime. Then I would say Fadria probably next, not a crime. And then I would say Joanna Smith Griffin, crime. And then I would say Caroline Ellison, crime.
Crime. Okay. All right, Jason, are you ready?
I think I'm ready. So okay. I'm gonna do it in the opposite order. So
worst to not worst. Okay.
So I think Caroline Ellison, big crime, with the underlying logic being there were individual end users whose ultimately were made whole mostly through luck, but demonstrably intent, mens rea, knowledge of what she was doing, etc.
Oh my god! Yeah. Okay, Turdy.
Dropping my big words. Actually, I think my list is basically just the same as Alex's, because Joanna Smith Griffin, crimey but less bad.
Yeah.
Pendra. What is Pendra's last name?
Pendergast.
Fadria. Yeah. That name sounds made up, by the way. It sounds like a Harry Potter. It sounds like a Harry Potter or something kind of name. I'll put her next, and then I can't believe I'm going to say this, but yeah, I agree that the Charlie Javis, not a crime or barely a crime.
Barely a crime.
I guess I'll caveat that and say I do think it was probably legally speaking a crime, but one that resources should not have been expended to prosecute versus letting JPMC
who among us has not created a list of 18,000 people where we faked email addresses and
I want to be totally
show
clear.
Me the
I have
law
never
that's
done
a crime.
any of these things, and I would think that they are wrong. Just to be totally clear, all the people on this list are very bad and have done bad things. But yeah, I agree
will
with
say
Jason's
that
ranking.
This would never happen. I interview real people, but if you ever saw a name in one of my newsletters and were like, does that person exist and have the job that she says they have? And it came out that I had faked that person, that's not a crime. It's not good. That's a fireable offense, but it's not a crime. And so the question is what I can't be arrested by the journalism police. So
didn't some political appointee recently say lying to a reporter is not a crime?
Yeah,
which,
unfortunately, that's why I like this.
Literally not a crime. Yeah, that your problem is you came up in a really low trust environment that gives you slanted views of the world. But Kiah, what is your ranking? Would you
actually? I'm so touched that you guys think my girl Charlie did not commit a crime.
No, did not say that. Did not say that.
Not one worth prosecuting versus using those resources to prosecute a synapse.
Absolutely
I get on that
a
jury
crime.
and
100% a crime.
I'm like jury nullification all the way. Okay. But actually, what I was going to say is that I think not a crime is fadria.
Ooh.
I think that's queen shit. And
ripping off female small
I
business
will say,
owners.
like, she should rip off male small business owners, not female small
Less of a
business
market
owners.
for that, I'm sorry to say.
Then Charlie, then Joanna, then Caroline. So again, we're on this pod supporting women's rights and women's wrongs.
We are.
These icons. Maybe we could do a male-centric version of this. And also, I'm surprised no one picked the impetus for this pod, which was in someone on the 2025 list was charged, which is why this became top of mind for me at the start of February. So,
well,
this is Martin Shkreli, which is like the case study in most awful of awful people.
Oh, totally. Well, he would
list.
have been top of the list for me. I
he's
guess
very early in the list,
Kiah,
2013. Yeah.
This will be a gimmick we can keep doing because the Forbes 30 under 30 list, like they're going to keep doing this. They said it themselves. They'll keep adding to their own hall of shame. So we'll have plenty of people to pick in the future.
I expect to get potentially feedback on this issue. And so maybe we have to do a second episode to address the feedback that I get and why I'm wrong. But gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate this. And thanks so much for doing this little true crime white collar meetup that I've wanted to have for a while.
Thank you.
Can't wait for the next one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Bank Nerd Corner. Stay up to date with news and trends in the bank space by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. Also, if you love Fintech Takes Banking, please tell a friend. Talk to you next time.